In a world where borders mean nothing and power decides who survives, one strategic decision pushed America to the edge of a silent, unseen war. A war that almost began without a single shot fired. But what really happened behind those locked doors? And why was the truth buried? Stay with me, because what you are about to hear was never meant to reach the public. The world saw peace on the surface, but deep underneath, war was already breathing. America's military moved like shadows across the desert, preparing for a conflict they swore never existed. But one officer discovered the truth, and once he saw it, he could never look away. Listen carefully, this story changes everything. It did not begin with bombs. It began with silence. A silence so heavy, even trained soldiers felt fear. America took a risk, one strategic gamble that could have destroyed entire nations. The question is, why? And who paid the price? Stay till the end, because this is where history was rewritten in the dark. Imagine standing in the heart of a battlefield. But the war has not started yet. Everyone is waiting, watching, calculating, because one wrong move and the world burns. This is the story of America's most dangerous decision, one that was never recorded in textbooks. Keep watching. The truth is darker than you think. When the world sleeps, wars are negotiated in the shadows. Deals are made. Lives are decided. America took a step that could have shattered global balance. But one man stood in the middle of it all, forced to choose between orders and humanity. Do not blink. This is where everything changes. The night sky above the command base was painted in a muted gray, heavy with the unspoken weight of decisions that could reshape the world. Cold wind slid across the tarmac, carrying the scent of metal, machine oil, and the distant thunder of unseen aircraft. Floodlights cast long, angular shadows across the concrete, stretching toward the horizon like reaching hands. Colonel Elias Ward stood at the edge of the runway, his posture rigid but his thoughts restless. His uniform bore the marks of years spent in the field, pressed and precise, yet wore at the edges from long nights without sleep. His eyes carried the memory of landscapes burned by conflict and towns silenced by the echo of war. He was a man who understood consequences, and he was about to witness a consequence unlike any he had known. Behind him, the steel door of the operations bunker slid open. General Marin Hayes approached with the sound of controlled footsteps, each one firm and unhesitating. Her presence radiated authority, a force sharpened by decades of political maneuvering and battlefield calculation. "Elias," she said in a voice steady as cold iron, "it is time." He did not turn to face her, not immediately. He watched the glowing horizon, where warplanes roamed like silent predators. He listened to the world breathe through engines and gears. "Are we certain this is the path we must walk?" he asked. No hesitation. Certainty is a luxury that belongs to those who are not standing where we stand. The answer was not harsh. It was truthful. It carried the burden of what was to come. Inside the bunker, screens and maps glowed with coded movements and classified projections. Lines cut across continents. Markers flashed in steady rhythm. Every color represented human lives, though no one spoke of them in those terms. A new operation was underway, a calculated maneuver that would shift balance, influence borders, and test alliances that once seemed unbreakable. It was not a strike of desperation. It was a gamble of precision, planned in silence, executed in shadows. Elias studied the briefing. Troop patterns, supply chains, satellite confirmations. The logic was sound. The risk was profound. Outside the base's perimeter, the night held another sound, faint but present, chanting, voices from a makeshift camp across the desert plain. Civilians, displaced by old conflicts, watching the sky with anxious anticipation. Their future hung in the balance of decisions made behind armored walls. Elias felt something shift inside him, a reminder that strategy and humanity rarely aligned cleanly. He wondered how many would awaken tomorrow in a world reshaped without their consent. General Hayes placed a hand on the table. Her composure was unwavering. "History does not wait for our fears," she said. "Only our actions." Her words were true, but truth did not always bring peace. A silent alarm pulsed across the room. Red indicators flickered. The first stage of deployment had begun. Elias inhaled slowly, filling his lungs with the sterile recycled air of the command center. His pulse steadied, though his mind was far from calm. There was no turning back now. The weight of strategy, loyalty, and consequence pressed upon him like the very roof of the bunker. Outside, the wind continued to roam freely across the desert. The chanting continued. The engines roared. The world held its breath. The operation had begun, and the shadows of war stretched farther than anyone had imagined. The desert winds grew stronger as dawn approached. A faint amber edge touched the horizon, casting a pale glow across the sands. It revealed checkpoints, armored vehicles, and rows of soldiers standing in composed silence, awaiting orders that none of them could see entirely. Colonel Elias Ward stepped outside the bunker again. The cold air brushed against his face, grounding him. He watched as a squad prepared drones for long-range reconnaissance, their hands moving with practiced efficiency, but their eyes betraying quiet unease. War demanded skill, but it also demanded the ability to pretend one felt nothing. He remembered a village from years past, reduced to rubble under the pressure of strategic necessity. He had walked among broken homes, shattered rooftops, and streets buried under quiet dust. A small toy soldier had rested at his feet untouched, as though it had been waiting for someone to understand its owner's absence. He had carried that memory ever since. General Hayes joined him once more. Her expression had changed, softened by something unspoken. "Recon units report movement along the northern corridor," she said. "Not enemy battalions. Civilians." Elias looked at her. The air between them tightened. Families are trying to get ahead of what is coming. The general's jaw tensed. Her voice remained unwavering, yet exhaustion traced the edges of her words. "We cannot halt the operation. Timing is the spine of strategy. A fracture here will break everything we have positioned." Elias nodded slowly, but there was a shadow in his gaze now. Not defiance. Something heavier. A question of what victory would cost. And to whom? A transmission cut through the command channel. Crisp and urgent. Satellite feed. New intelligence. Unmarked carriers moving toward an Allied border. Their origin unknown. The strategic gamble was shifting even as it began. The room stirred. Officers leaned in toward screens. Voices lowered. Tension thickened like fog that refused to lift. This was not part of any projected response, Hayes said, brows drawn in concentrated thought. Someone else is moving pieces in our game. The word someone weighed heavily, because the board had many players, but only a few capable of rewriting the rules. Elias studied the footage. The carriers bore no flags, no emblems, no identifiers. Yet their formation was precise, disciplined, practiced. Not mercenaries. Not amateurs. A force with intent. General Hayes stepped closer to the screen. Her eyes narrowed not in fear, but in calculation. If they reach the corridor before we execute Phase 2, the entire region becomes a chessboard with no stable center. The corridors. The supply lines. The alliances balanced on agreements spoken behind closed doors. All could collapse in a single unknown move. Elias spoke quietly. Then the gamble is no longer ours alone. Hayes turned to him. For the first time, he saw something human beneath the hardened exterior. Not uncertainty. Responsibility. "We proceed," she said. "But we adjust. We will have to adapt faster than the world can blink." Outside, the first aircraft climbed into the lightening sky, engines pulsing with restrained energy. Soldiers boarded transports. Boots struck metal ramps in measured rhythm. A distant tremor rolled beneath the earth, as though the land itself recognized the shift taking place. Elias stood among them, quiet, lost in the realization that history rarely declared its turning points until after the dust had settled. He felt the weight of every silent face, every unspoken fear, every nameless life caught in the crossfire decisions made by those who would never meet them. The operation signal was seconds away. The world balanced on the edge of a blade, and just as the order was about to be spoken, just as breath tightened in every chest, just as the engines prepared to surge forward into the unfolding storm, a single unfamiliar transmission cut into the command channel. A voice, calm, Measured, unmistakably deliberate. Stand by. New directive incoming. The room froze, and the future paused with it. The command room turned silent, as though the air itself refused to move. Every officer, every soldier, every operative stood locked in place. The voice on the transmission carried neither panic nor haste. It was composed with certainty that suggested preparation long before this moment. General Hayes stepped forward. Her tone was level, but her eyes sharpened with attention. Identify the source. Technicians began tracing signal pathways, tapping keys with rapid precision. The screen flickered with tracking grids and coded routing markers. No origin appeared. The signal defied the usual patterns, rerouting through layers that suggested either deep governmental clearance or someone who had mastered how to hide behind it. The message returned, steady and direct. Stand down from Phase 2. Authority override confirmed. Hayes' jaw tensed. There were only 3 individuals with the power to override a full-scale strategic deployment at this stage. She was one of them. Elias was another, by special emergency designation. The third was a name avoided in conversation. The president, whose recent strategies had already divided entire committees, military blocs, and alliances. A leader under intense scrutiny, surrounded by advisors who disagreed on where power should rest. Hayes looked at Elias. He would not halt this without cause. Not now. Not when we are already moving. Elias kept his gaze on the transmission feed. Unless something changed, or someone forced a change. The tension in the room shifted. This was no longer solely a military operation. It was a political fracture revealing itself in real time. A secondary report flashed across the screen. Encrypted. High priority. The seal unmistakable. A private advisory from an allied nation. A warning. Not about troop movement. Not about enemy action. About internal interference. Someone inside the strategic chain had leaked operational intent beyond friendly borders. Someone who understood the plan's every step. Hayes' voice lowered, quiet enough that only Elias could hear. Trust is now a battlefield. Outside, the rumble of engines paused. Aircraft held in standby formation. Convoys remained still under the first light of the rising sun. The soldiers did not know why the halt had occurred. They only felt the shift in the air, the break in rhythm. Elias stepped out once again into the open. The horizon glowed brighter now, streaks of amber and pale gold pulling the desert out of night shelter. Wind moved across sand and steel, carrying distant voices and unspoken fears. He watched a young soldier adjusting his helmet, hands trembling just slightly, not from fear of combat, but the uncertainty of waiting. Waiting was always heavier than action. Hayes joined him again. Her composure remained iron-bound, but her silence revealed thought in motion. If trust is broken, Elias said, then every move we make becomes a risk beyond calculation. Hayes nodded slowly. We are not only fighting what lies outside our borders. We are fighting shadows within our own walls. Far in the distance, a plume of dust rose. Not large, not loud, but distinct. Movement, not military, not organized. A caravan of civilian trucks and abandoned transport buses crawled across the flat landscape, carrying families who had left their homes before dawn. Their silhouettes flickered against the light, walking beside vehicles that barely ran. They were moving toward the border, toward safety, or toward a front line they did not know was forming beneath their feet. Elias felt the weight return to his chest. War did not wait for the innocent to step aside. The encrypted channel activated once more. No voice this time, just a set of coordinates. New deployment points. Positions that did not match any previous strategic model. Someone had rewritten the next move. Hayes looked at the coordinates with a stillness that spoke of calculations unfolding faster than words could express. These are not defensive placements, she said. They are staging points. Staging for something larger than an operation, larger than a border dispute, larger than a regional conflict. The world was shifting, piece by piece, quietly, deliberately, and the soldiers, the civilians, the officers, the generals, the unseen players behind all decisions. They were already inside the new design. The wind swept across the command base once more, carrying with it a distant, hollow resonance, as though the land itself was preparing to witness history. Elias turned toward Hayes. "What do we do now?" Her answer came with measured certainty. "We move, but not in the way they expect." She signaled for the strategic maps to be redrawn, orders prepared, communications rerouted. Every motion was the beginning of a new path. And just as the first revised command was about to be issued, just as the shift in strategy began to take shape, a single figure appeared at the far end of the base's perimeter, walking alone, unannounced, moving with the calm assurance of someone who knew exactly where they were going. The guards raised their weapons. No one fired, because something in the figure's presence held the air still. The sun rose behind him, casting his shadow long across the ground, touching the feet of every soldier watching. Elias stared. Recognition stirred. Not fully formed. Not yet, but enough to unsettle the silence. The figure continued forward, step by steady step, and the moment that would change everything was approaching. The figure moved with deliberate slowness, each step measured, as though the distance itself held meaning. His boots pressed into the sand, leaving steady print behind him, untouched by hesitation. The rising sun carved his silhouette into sharp definition, making it impossible to ignore him, impossible to dismiss him as coincidence. Soldiers along the perimeter exchanged tense glances. Their training told them to respond, to challenge, to contain. Yet something about the man's presence held their discipline in place, as if instinct itself recognized authority before orders were spoken. Colonel Elias Ward walked forward to meet him. He felt neither fear nor familiarity, only a quiet recognition forming in the space where memory and instinct intersected. The air grew heavier with each step he took, as if the world understood that this meeting carried weight beyond rank or position. The figure stopped a few paces away. His face was lined with the marks of travel and time, not old, but weathered by experience in places where decisions came with consequences that lived in one's eyes forever. His uniform bore no insignia, no nation, no allegiance marked openly, yet his posture spoke for him. This was someone who had stood on front lines unseen by public history. General Hayes arrived beside Elias, her expression guarded, her tone controlled as steel. "State your name." The man looked at her, not with challenge, but with clarity. "My identity is classified under Directive Veil Black," he said. A directive that both Elias and Hayes knew well, one that existed only for operations buried beneath layers of secrecy, so deep they were rumored to be myths among most military ranks. Hayes' voice lowered. "Veil Black operations are frozen. No one with that clearance should be active in this region." The man studied her, then Elias. "Frozen on paper," he answered, "but not in practice." Elias felt something shift again, a slow realization unfurling. Someone had awakened something buried, something intentionally kept silent. The man continued, his voice steady, measured in tone and pace. "The strategic gamble you are about to engage is not solely yours. Others have already moved pieces that you have not yet seen. Forces not aligned with nations, but with outcomes. You are playing on a board that has already been rearranged." General Hayes' fingers curled at her side, not from fear, but calculation. "Then name the players." The man's gaze moved across the horizon, instead of answering directly. Some wars are not fought for land, resources, or borders. Some wars are shaped to rewrite influence, to remake the idea of stability itself. Elias felt the meaning settle in him, like a stone dropped into deep water. This was not about territory. This was not about defending allies. This was about power, not the kind that nations claimed, but the kind that controlled them. The man finally looked back at them. "There are factions moving now. Factions you once called allies, who no longer believe in traditional balance. They are preparing to shift the world toward controlled destabilization, and they are counting on this operation to trigger it." One of the nearby officers listening and involuntarily stepped back. Hayes remained still as granite. "And you have come to advise us?" The man gave a single, subtle nod. "I have come to reveal the part of the board you were not meant to see." He then extended a data module, unmarked secure, sealed with authentication codes that only the highest chains of intelligence clearance could engage. Elias took it. The device felt heavier than its size should allow. Inside it, there would be maps, communications, patterns, evidence of movements hidden beyond surveillance channels, traces of hands shaping outcomes in silence. The wind swept across the open base, carrying a stillness that was no longer quiet, but waiting. Hayes looked at Elias. "If this is true," she said quietly, so only he could hear, "then everything we plan must be reconsidered from its foundation." Elias nodded once, not in agreement with her statement, in acknowledgement of the truth he already sensed. The operation had never been fully theirs. Not anymore. The soldiers remained on standby. The aircraft engines hummed in readiness. The sun rose higher, warming the steel, the sand, the skin of every person who stood in the unfolding moment. Hayes signaled for the war room to prepare an immediate closed session. The man who arrived unannounced stood silently now, waiting for the next move. Elias looked toward the horizon, where the dust from the civilian caravan continued to drift, where unarmed lives pressed forward along a path none of them understood. Time did not pause, but decisions did. For the first time since the operation began, Elias felt the weight of choice, not as obligation, but as consequence. He turned toward the bunker. The door began to open. The final decision had not yet been spoken, and what emerged from that room would shape the world beyond borders, beyond strategies, beyond war. But the decision itself had not come. Not yet, not while the world held its breath. Elias entered the bunker with the data module gripped firmly in his hand. The metal door sealed behind him, shutting out the rising sun, the soldiers, the shifting sands, and the quiet tension outside. Inside, the room pulsed with light from screens displaying maps, numbers, coded transmissions. Every detail moved with precision. Yet now, every detail was suspect. General Hayes followed, her boots striking the floor in controlled rhythm. She did not speak. She did not need to. Elias understood. They were entering a moment where words mattered less than truth, and truth itself was layered in deception. He placed a module into the secure console. Encryption sequences unfolded like countless doors unlocking in silence. The screen brightened with images, documents, intercepted communications. Layers of strategy, layered beneath strategies already believed to be the foundation. There were records of meetings held in private estates far from political chambers. Conversations between powerful diplomats who were no longer acting on behalf of their nations, but instead on behalf of vision that rewrote the meaning of influence. Financial networks prepared to shift as soon as borders were redrawn. Private security forces positioned like invisible scaffolding behind recognized armies. A new balance, not of peace, not of stability, but of managed conflict, sustained tension, controlled chaos. A world where war was no longer a failure, but a design. Hayes exhaled slowly, but not in defeat. "We were not directing the board," she said. "We were placed upon it." Her eyes sharpened in a way that suggested calculation, resolve, and something far deeper, responsibility born from seeing the truth too clearly. Elias scrolled further, and there, among the files, was a pattern, not military, not political, personal, names of officers, analysts, foreign operatives, those recruited, turned, influenced, quietly, steadily, over years. Some had already died under unexplained circumstances. Others continued to serve, unnoticed. A few names glowed in red. One of them was stationed inside this base. Elias felt the weight of realization settle over him like a cold shadow. Hayes stood silent, absorbing the same truth. Someone here was not only aware of the gamble. They were part of it. Outside, the aircraft remained on standby, waiting for command to move. The soldiers still held their positions. The caravan of civilians continued forward, unaware of the invisible lines being drawn around them. The man with the veiled black classification waited with the patience of someone who understood time differently. He did not push. He did not speak. He simply existed, as though the moment belonged to him as much as to the room. Hayes turned to Elias with clarity. "We cannot stop the operation, but we cannot proceed blindly. Elias nodded once. The world was still balanced on the blade. Hayes lowered her voice to a tone meant for strategic decision-making. We locate the infiltrator first. Quietly, without alert. If this operation is being steered from within, then every move we make is already known. Elias thought of the soldiers outside, of the civilians crossing the sands, of alliances that were already bending under unseen pressure. And he knew something else. The infiltrator would not be hiding in shadow. They would be positioned in plain sight, near influence, near trust, near power. He opened the personnel records, cross-referenced deployment logs, compared authorization signatures. One name rose slowly to the surface. Someone who had been near every planning session. Someone who had access to communications routing. Someone who had never drawn suspicion because they were always present, always silent, always efficient. A communications officer who had been transferred and under emergency reassignment 3 months earlier. Lieutenant Mara Keene. Elias felt the room narrow. Hayes' expression did not shift, but her eyes held quiet understanding. Not accusation, not certainty, but awareness. The kind of awareness that came before confrontation. Hayes spoke. She will not run. Not yet. She will watch us. She will wait to see which direction we turn. Elias stepped away from the console. He moved toward the door, each step slow, aware of the gravity of what would follow. Outside, the sun was now higher, bright enough to cast harsh, defined shadows across steel and sand. Lieutenant Mara Keene stood near the communications array, her hands moving across controls with practiced precision, her posture calm, her expression neutral, but her eyes lifted the moment Elias approached, as if she had been waiting, not startled, not afraid, ready. The wind stilled for a moment. Elias stopped a few steps away from her. She met his gaze with a quiet that carried meaning he could not yet name. No words passed between them. Not yet. Not while the world continued to wait for the order that had still not been spoken. Not while the aircraft engines hummed. Not while the civilians walked forward toward a border that was no longer just a border. Not while unseen hands shaped tomorrow. The moment between them held. And the decision that would break, it had not yet arrived. Lieutenant Mara Keene remained still, her fingertips resting above the illuminated keys of the communications board. The screens cast a pale blue glow across her face, smoothing her expression into something unreadable. It was a kind of face trained to reveal nothing, not loyalty, not guilt, not fear. Elias stopped just a breath away. The sounds around them hummed. Engines idling in the whole line, calm chatter pulsing quietly in the background, the steady thrum of the base's power grid. Yet everything felt muted, as though the world had narrowed itself to only these two figures. Mara did not speak first. She allowed silence to settle, shaping it into a field between them, one where only intent mattered. Elias studied her carefully, not for confession, not for threat, but for truth that was already present, lingering just beneath stillness. Her voice, when it came, was steady. You found it. No denial, no pretense. Elias did not answer. He did not need to. His presence was answer enough. Mara lowered her hand slowly, deliberately, and placed it behind her back. Not as surrender, as acceptance. I imagine the general is watching, she said quietly. Elias gave a slight nod. General Hayes observed from across the command floor, her eyes sharp, her posture unbroken. Mara glanced toward the desert horizon, where the rising light continued its slow advance. It is already in motion, she said. Not because I set it in motion, but because it was always meant to happen this way. Elias spoke at last. There were other paths. Mara's eyes softened at the edges, but not in regret. No, there were only delays. Choices that look like decisions but lead to the same end. You know this, Colonel. You have seen how wars shape themselves. How leaders move only after consequences are inevitable. Her voice carried neither pride nor apology. It carried understanding. The kind that came from standing too close to the core of power. Elias stepped closer by one measured pace. And what end are you serving? Mara held his gaze. The end where power is no longer scattered, where alliances are not chosen by convenience, where order replaces this endless cycle of reaction. Her words were not emotional. They were precise, practiced, learned, believed. The conflicts you fear, she continued, are already spreading. Borders are already unstable. Nations are already preparing for what they refuse to admit aloud. But if one force holds the center, if one vision directs the future, there is no collapse, only transition. Elias heard the conviction in her tone. He had heard it before, from those who believe in control as a solution to chaos, from those who believe stability required sacrifice from those who did not choose to give it. At the cost of choice, he said. Mara did not look away. Choice is a luxury of the stable. You know this, Elias. You have walked through burned villages. You have seen what choice looks like when structures fall. Her words hit him harder than any accusation could, because he remembered, and the memory was not distant. It lived behind his eyes. General Hayes approached then, quietly, but without hesitation. The air around them shifted. Mara turned to her. You cannot stop what is coming, she said, not because you lack power, but because you are using an old map for a new world. Hayes did not respond. Her face remained unreadable. Mara continued, her voice calm. But you can decide which side of the new world you stand on when it arrives. The screens behind her flickered. A new transmission appeared. Unscheduled, uncoded, direct, coordinates, movements, deployments, not from within their forces, but from forces moving toward them. Not enemies, not allies, something in between. Hayes' eyes narrowed, not in fear, but in strategic recognition. They are moving already, Mara said. They expected you to hesitate, but they did not expect you to see the full board this early. Elias felt something shift in the air, a slow tightening, like the moment before a storm breaks. Not loud, not violent, inevitable. Hayes stepped forward until she stood directly before Mara. What role were you meant to play next? Mara answered without delay. I was meant to send the signal to initiate the border shift. Once it began, your forces would respond. Others would respond to your response. The chain reaction would unfold exactly as planned. Elias spoke quietly. And now, Mara's expression changed, for the first time, just slightly. A fraction, a flicker of something human. Now the board is open, and that means the outcome is no longer predetermined. Outside, the engines surged again, awaiting command. The caravan of civilians continued moving, unaware the silent were unfolding in the air around them. The figure from Veil Black watched from a distance, as though he had been waiting precisely for this moment. Hayes turned, slowly, deliberately, toward Elias. The decision was close now, closer than any of them had allowed themselves to believe. But it was not spoken. Not yet, because the world itself seemed to pause, holding its breath, waiting for a choice that would determine the shape of the future. The word had not been given. The order had not been released. And every second passing tightened the line between what had been planned and what history was about to become. Elias stood between General Hayes and Mara Keene, the tension drawn tight as wire. No raised voices, no sudden movements, no dramatic declarations. The silence itself had weight, shaped by everything that remained unspoken. Outside, the base continued to hold its breath. Engines remained hot. Pilots sat in cockpits, hands resting on controls, waiting for the command that had been promised but not delivered. The sky was now a pale gold, the sun fully risen, casting sharp angles and long shadows that reached across the concrete like the stretched outline of something watching. General Hayes spoke first. Lieutenant, step away from the communication station. It was not a threat. It was the beginning of a decision. Mara obeyed, not reluctantly, not fearfully, as if she had expected this moment to arrive exactly as it had. Elias watched her closely. He knew people who lied with confidence. He knew people who believed with conviction. Mara was neither. She was someone who had accepted the shape of the world before others had seen the lines forming. A strategist, hidden in plain sight. Hayes signaled the security officer with a glance. 2 soldiers approached, quiet and precise. Mara did not resist as they stood beside her. She remained steady, eyes forward. But she spoke again, and her words were not defensive. "You believe stopping me will stop what is coming," she said. "It will not. The operation you fear has already begun in hearts, not in orders. People are choosing sides whether they know it or not." Her tone was calm, almost gentle, as if she believed she was offering clarity, not challenge. Hayes did not answer. Elias did. "Then tell me what you believe comes next." Mara looked at him, her expression neither triumphant nor desperate. "I believe the world has already shifted. I believe nations are no longer the primary force. What comes next is alignment. People choosing the structures they trust more than the borders they were born inside. You think this is about armies. It is not. It is about influence. Influence is the battlefield now." Her words settled in the air like slow-falling dust. Hayes gave the smallest nod to the soldiers. They guided Mara away, not roughly, but with the care reserved for someone who was still dangerous even in silence. As she passed Elias, she paused, not to appeal, not to warn, to acknowledge. "You care for the lives outside these walls," she said quietly. "I hope that remains true, even when the cost changes." Then she was escorted out of the bunker, the door sealed behind her. The silence that followed was not the same as before. It was heavier, thicker, more real. Hayes placed her hands on the edge of the main console, grounding herself. "Colonel Ward," she said, "we moved a contingency protocol. The operation is paused, but the region is not. We must establish field contact with the civilian caravan. Their position is about to intersect with conflict territory." Elias nodded. He understood. War was not only fought with weapons. It was fought in the spaces where human lives intersected with power. He left the bunker and stepped back into the open air. The sun was brighter now, warming the base, glinting off metal surfaces and polished glass. The desert wind carried the faint echo of distant engines, not theirs. Something was approaching. The figure from Veil Black still stood at perimeter, unmoving, watching, waiting. Elias walked toward him. "You knew about her," Elias said. The man's gaze did not shift. "I knew there would be someone. I did not know who. That is why I came." The answer was not an evasion. It was truth stated without apology. Elias looked toward the horizon. The caravan of civilians stretched across the desert like a slow-moving scar. Families, children, elders, all walking toward a border they believed offered safety. But safety was no longer a simple direction. The man spoke again. "They are walking into the line of conflict. Others are moving from the north. If they intersect, they become leverage." Elias felt the weight of that word. Leverage. Lives used as pieces on a board. He breathed in slowly, steadying himself. "Then I will reach them before the conflict does." The man's expression remained still, but his eyes shifted in recognition of resolve. "You will not go alone." Elias looked back toward the base. Pilots waiting. Soldiers ready. General Hayes preparing new command sequences. He knew who he needed. Not the loudest, not the fiercest. The ones who could choose restraint where others chose force. He selected his team silently, name by name. On the edge of the base, Mara Keene was being escorted to secure holding. She did not look back, but she paused as if sensing movement behind her. Her expression was unreadable. The wind continued to move. Engines vibrated with contained power. The desert horizon shimmered under rising heat. Elias stood ready to speak the order that would determine not only the next move of strategy, but the direction of the world. He opened his mouth. The radio crackled alive before any command could be spoken. A transmission came through, firm and clear. Unidentified convoy approaching fast from the west. Armed. Formation suggests tactical intent. Awaiting your instructions. The decision moment sharpened. One order would determine whether this day became rescue or ignition. The sentence had not been spoken yet. Not yet. Not while the world held still for one breath more. The radio static seemed to stretch for an eternity. Every soldier, every pilot, every technician in the base froze, caught between preparation and revelation. Elias stepped forward, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of every choice they had made. "Maintain distance," he ordered. "No engagement. We moved to intercept the civilians. Protection only." The air shifted. People exhaled. Engines surged to life, but without the roar of aggression, just a controlled hum of purpose. General Hayes met Elias's eyes from across the command floor. No nod was exchanged. No words. Respect did not need volume. Within minutes, 3 transport carriers and 2 armored scout vehicles rolled out across the desert flats, kicking dust into the morning heat. Elias rode in the lead vehicle, the wind burning against his face, the land unfolding endlessly ahead. The caravan of families grew clearer, silhouettes wavering in the shimmering air, mothers carrying children, elders leaning on makeshift canes, young men walking with hands raised to show they were unarmed. Behind them, just distant enough to be threatening, was the approaching convoy. Not rescuers, not allies, opportunists, conflict predators. When Elias's convoy reached the civilians, he stepped out and walked forward alone, no weapons drawn. A young boy looked up at him first, dust on his cheeks, exhaustion in his eyes. Elias knelt to his level. "You are safe now," he said, and for the first time that morning he believed it. The armored convoy drew closer, engines crackling across the hard earth. But when they saw the organized protection, the coordinated presence, the soldiers who stood, ready without aggression, they slowed. Conflict does not always retreat because of strength. Sometimes it retreats because it sees no crack to enter. The approaching vehicles turned. The desert swallowed them. No heroics, no battle, just a choice made quietly on an open stretch of earth where no one would ever carve a monument. The civilians were escorted to the border safely, guided across the line where another team of medics and relief workers waited. Children received water first. Elders were helped off their feet. People cried softly, not from loss, but from the stunned relief of still being here. Back at the base, the sun was now high. Heat rose from the concrete in shimmering waves. Mara Keene was transported not to a dark cell, but to a diplomatic holding facility. Her last words still echoed. Influence is a battlefield now. She was not wrong. But influence was not owned by any single ideology. People were still the deciding force. Elias walked the perimeter one last time before evening. The figure from Veil Black was gone. No trace. Not a footprint. Some allies of the kind you never introduce and never speak of again. At sunset, Elias stood beside General Hayes, overlooking the vast open land. "There will be more days like this," Hayes said. "Yes," Elias replied, "but we will meet them the same way. Not with fear, not with preemptive destruction, but with presence, with clarity, with refusal to let chaos make the first call." The wind carried the day's dust away, leaving the horizon clean. Night slowly unfolded above them, stars spreading across the sky like quiet signals. No music swelled, no headlines flashed, no victory banners were raised. Just the simplest truth. A war prevented is greater than a war won. And somewhere out there, people continued walking, carrying their lives forward, never knowing how close the world had leaned toward fire. The story did not end with explosions or glory. It ended with stillness, with breath, with life continuing onward. And that is sometimes the most heroic ending we ever get.